We gotta connect to Kick. We gotta connect to YouTube. We gotta Twitch. Looks like it's going well. Let's get our chat up. Activate, find it. Here we go. Looks like it worked. Yes. Those two. What's going on with YouTube? I am incorrect. There we go. All right, all showing up. My audio looks fine. I don't know. When I see other people, they have their mic like right beside their mouth. No, I'm not sure if I need that. I think my mic picked me up well enough. All right. Well, I'm going to get into a couple topics today. First thing I'm going to look at is Alberta separation. It looks like there's been a new update, and we may be getting a referendum question. So that's exciting. I also hear that a lot of people are confused by the referendum question, so we're gonna look into it, and we're just gonna have a see. Okay, let's have a look. This is a big and fast-moving story. Here's a full breakdown of where things stand as of today, May 25th, 2026. All right. Yes, there will be a referendum question. Okay, well that answers the, the primary question. On October 19th, 2026, on the evening of May 21st, Premier Danielle Smith addressed Albertans and announced the following. A question will be added to the October 19th ballot asking whether Alberta's government should commence the legal process necessary to hold a binding referendum on separation from Canada. So, from my understanding, their attempts to hold a binding referendum got shut down in the courts. And so now they're like, okay, well, we'll just ask a question to see if the people want us to pursue a binding referendum. And so they just essentially took another step back and they're asking a question, which I think is going to be the 10th question, because I think there was already 9 going to be on there on the referendum coming up on October 19th. Ooh, the exact wording of the question. Okay, because this is where I think some confusion is happening. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada, or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada? Okay, so it's not a yes-no question. So then, do you have 2 boxes? One that says, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? And then a box that says, should Alberta commence the legal, like that's a big question with the box. Like, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Simple yes or no. Okay. Importantly, or should. How is this a yes or no question? Importantly, a yes vote in October would not trigger separation. What? Like, there's 2 questions here, right? So is this 2 different referendum questions? Should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Yes or no? Should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada, yes or no. But they're making it one question? Okay, let's continue. Importantly, a yes vote in October would trigger separation. But what if the question is, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Wouldn't that mean a yes vote would not trigger separation? I see the confusion. I definitely see the confusion. When you start with, should Alberta remain a province of Canada, and you're supposed to vote no if you don't want to separate. Okay, I'm gonna just go out there and guess that this is not going to be the final wording of the question, because this doesn't make sense. The exact wording of the question is, okay, let's continue to read, and I'll come back to this. Importantly, a yes vote in October would not trigger separation. So, should Alberta remain a province of Canada, voting yes would not trigger separation. Okay, that makes sense. But then, why is there a second question? It would only direct the government on the path citizens want to take. The October vote also marks the first time in Canadian history that a province other than Quebec has put the question of separation to the public. Like, I got no problem with a referendum question on separation. I kind of like the non-binding process first that we're taking. I kind of like how it's being done right now. This question, if this is the wording of it, like, that's not going to tell you anything. 90% of people are going to be like, which question am I answering? The first one or the second one? Okay. Let's continue. I'll ask about this. Why did Smith act now on Alberta? In my opinion, like, both the Forever Canada and Stay Free Alberta petitions, they both got enough votes for a referendum question. And so I feel like if you go through the process, you get the votes to get the referendum question. Even if it's a non-binding referendum question, you should have it. Should be there. And the fact that it was getting shut down legally just didn't make sense to me. Okay, an Alberta judge ruled that the Citizens Initiative petition organized by the group Stay Free Alberta was unconstitutional, finding that there was inadequate consultation with a First Nations band about the potential effects of the petition on their treaty rights. Smith called the ruling an overreach. She defended the referendum question, saying the court's ruling left her with no other option. And while she promised to appeal it, the process could take years. Yeah, it could get stuck in the court for a long time, right? Smith's personal opinion. Smith was clear that she personally supports Alberta remaining in Canada and would vote against separation in a provincial referendum. She framed the October vote as a way to hear from Albertans and move forward rather than letting the debate drag on indefinitely. Like, I feel like this is a good decision on her part. As long as the question is clear, then I largely support those. How Albertans responding? New poll from the Angus Reid Institute finds that 60% of Albertans would vote no to the official October question. They vote no. Yeah. So if you vote no, it's staying in Canada, compared to 35 who would vote yes. Now, remember, when I look deeper into this, a lot of the yes vote is more of a protest vote against Ottawa, and not really like an actual desire to leave. As far as I could tell when I was looking at it, because like there's a lot of reasons for people to be angry with the federal government, and this is a way that they can express it. When they look at actually like how many people, when they understand the consequences and understand the actual process of leaving, wanted to vote, it was somewhere between like 15 and 19% would would stay the course and want to leave no matter what. And I think this is what happened in Brexit. Like Brexit was kind of like a protest against the current government, and not like people didn't really understand the full consequences of what leaving would look like and what leaving would do to the economy. So, I mean, it's still much lower than the 50%. I assume they would need to push forward for an actual binding referendum, but who knows? These numbers can shift wildly depending on what happens in Ottawa. They can. When asked a simpler hypothetical leave or stay, the federal position strengthened further, with 66% opting to stay and 30% choosing to leave. So when they clarify the question, is this like part of their plan to use a confusing question? I hope not. However, roughly half of respondents found the 37-word question confusing. Yeah. I mean, I'm also finding it confusing. Like, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? That should be the end of the question. Right there. If you wanted to include a second question, sure, put that one on there. There's no one's saying we can only have one referendum question. Let's have more referendum questions. I got no problem with that. I would also like, you know how they do all those online poll questions where it's like slightly agree, neutral, slightly disagree. Where you have like different tones. I think that would give you more information of where people stand. Like, do you slightly want to leave, or strongly want to leave? Okay. Political reaction. The move has been controversial on both sides. Separatist-like lawyer Jeff Rath called it a betrayal, and former Calgary Mayor Nia Nishin accused Smith of extraordinarily political malfeasance, saying she would not lift one finger to help those who want to remain in Canada. So to directly answer your question, yes, Albertans will get to vote on October 19th. It should be a direct separation vote, but rather a vote on... It won't be a direct separation vote, but rather a vote on whether to begin the legal process that could lead to one. This is definitely confusing because the first part of this, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Okay, clear. Yes or no. But if you vote yes, you're actually stating that the government of Alberta should commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding political referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this is not going to be the final wording, because something tells me she's going to get a lot of backlash. Just make it two different questions. Nice and easy. Something tells me there's going to be a lot of backlash there. The Alberta referendum separation question appears to have two different questions in it. Which one are you supposed to answer? And why are there two questions? let's see what he has to say. So we're gonna watch her a 14-minute address, which we'll watch after this. Let's see. Good observation. You're not alone in finding it confusing. About half of Albertans surveyed found the question confusing. Here's why it reads that way and what's actually going on. It's one question with two answer choices baked into it. The question isn't literally asking two separate things. It's structured as an A or B. Okay, yes, you want this or you want that. Binary choice, which is a common referendum format. Yes, do you want coffee or okay. The full context is, so then should Alberta remain the province? Like, but you've asked, do you want coffee or tea? And then you've told them to answer yes or no. Do you want coffee or tea? Your answer is yes or no. Well, how do I get the tea? You know? Okay, let's see if we can follow this logic. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada, or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required? Okay, yeah. Should to. I'm not going to continue to read that whole thing. Vote no. Alberta stays in Canada. Like, as long as this is clearly defined, like, and it's not no and yes, it's no, Alberta stays in Canada. Yes, the government starts the legal process towards a binding separation referendum. Like, as long as this is described, something tells me it's not. Like, it seems like a trick because it's a huge question and people are going to read, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Okay, yes, I agree to that. And so you click yes without realizing that you're actually agreeing to the whole second part of the question. Ugh. Like, if you ask someone if they want coffee or tea, your answers aren't supposed to be yes and no. They're supposed to be coffee or tea. But I feel like you're going to walk in there and you're going to get a no or a yes. Okay. So why does it feel like two questions? The confusing comes from two things, the length and legal language. Simpler version could have been, should Alberta separate from Canada, yes or no? Yeah, like that's what you want to ask. That's what it should be, right there. Instead, the question is through and long and packed with constitutional legal terminology, asking about a process, not the outcome. The yes vote doesn't mean separation. It means starting the legal process old. Okay. Smith said the wording was intended to appease both sides of the debate. Just give us two questions. Like, there was two petitions, Forever Canada and Stay Free Alberta, that both got the required signatures to get a referendum questions. Give them both a question. Give them both a question. Not hard. Like, you basically got two different questions. Just split them up. Which is part of why it reads as a compromise. It avoids directly asking, do you want to leave Canada? While still giving separatists a path forward. Critics, including legal experts, weren't impressed. I mean, I'm not impressed. A University of Calgary law professor, Emeritus, describes it as a rather clumsy attempt to get around the decision of the judge. So, all right, first of all, what the heck is this? Is that a name that's not capitalized?
Emeritus
Emeritus. Define emeritus. Emeritus is an honorary title given to a professor who has retired honorably from a distinguished career. Oh, so a retired professor. Calgary Law Professor Emeritus. Describes it as a rather clumsy attempt to get around. So, is it so confusing because they're trying to get around the legal worker, the judge ruling? So the question is deliberately confusing to get around the legal ruling that stopped the referendum? Because the whole, like, do you want coffee or tea? Yes or no? How do you get your coffee? That's a reasonable interpretation, and it's essentially what critics are arguing. Here's the honest breakdown. What the courts ruled. The judge struck down the original Stay Free Alberta petition question because the government hadn't adequately consulted with Indigenous communities about how it would affect their treaty rights. If it's a non-binding petition, like, I don't... Maybe they were trying to get a binding petition. But if it's a non-binding petition, I don't see how... Non-binding. Not going to affect the treaty rights. You talk about that after you find out if people want to leave or not. That ruling blocked a direct binding separation referendum. Okay. So that ruling blocked a direct binding separation. So essentially, they were trying to get a binding separation referendum. And now they've had to do a non-binding one because a court order blocked the binding separation referendum. Which I completely understand. Like, you can't have a binding referendum without figuring out all the details of what a yes would actually. And so they're just putting a non-binding question in. Rather than wait for the appeal, she added a government authorized question, not a citizen. You should have added two. Not a citizen petition question. The existing October 19th ballot because it came from the government rather than from the petition process. It sidesteps the court ruling entirely. The legal challenge was specifically against the petition mechanism, not the government's own power to put referendum questions to voters. Is the confusing wording deliberate? Probably partly yes, but for a few reasons at once. The indirect, asking about starting a process rather than separating itself, may be designed to keep legally defensible. Okay, that makes sense. Smith herself said that the wording was meant to give both Federalists and Separatists something they could live with. The complexity also gives Smith political cover. She can say she's respecting democracy and letting Albertans decide while personally campaigning for no. Okay. My concern is that, let's think like a dumb person for a second who isn't going to research this and is just going to go and check their boxes because they go in and vote every time they get a chance. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada? I see no way that this should be a yes or no question. Like, the second part is going to confuse people, and they're just going to go back and they're going to just be like, okay, I don't understand the second part. Should Alberta remain a province of Canada? They're going to answer that in yes and no. And if they answer yes, then they'll be actually answering for the opposite So if you get confused and you just look at the first part and you answer that, vote yes, you're actually voting for the opposite of what you want. And this is the thing you don't want to have happen in your referendum question. Okay? This is designed to get misleading information. I mean, just break it up into 2 different questions. I think they probably will. I think they'll get enough pushback that they'll break it up. Well, let's see what Premier Danielle Smith has to say.
Last week, an Alberta judge released a decision finding that the citizen initiative petition organized by the group Stay Free Alberta on the issue of Alberta separation is unconstitutional because, in the judge's view, there was not adequate consultation done with the First Nations band about the potential effect of the petition on their treaty rights. This ruling fundamentally misinterprets the nature of the duty to consult, which was never meant to prevent citizens from making their voices heard through a democratic process. Now, I want to be clear. I support Alberta remaining in Canada. That is how I would vote on separation in a provincial referendum. It is also the position of my government and my caucus. However, despite my personal support for remaining in Canada, I am deeply troubled by an erroneous court decision that interferes with the democratic rights of hundreds.
Like, I completely agree. If you have a process that allows citizen referendum question to be put out there, like, not a binding one, let me see. Was the original petition question going to be binding? How do I say that better? Is the original petition referendum question referendum? Was the original petition referendum question going to be binding? Is that why it was shut down by the courts? Let's see what we find there. Because a binding referendum question and a non-binding referendum question are very different. One, the government has to enforce, and the other one is just essentially getting an opinion of the people on a subject, right? And I find if you have a way to put a non-binding question referendum to your people, then if they get the vote, that should happen, right? Even if there's like a legal issue, you got to figure that out. If there's enough people that support it. If there's not, then you don't even got to worry about it, right? And so the whole binding or not binding is important. And the answer is actually no. The courts did not shut it down because it was binding. The reason was different. Let me clarify both things. The original petition question binding, the original Stay Free Alberta petition, if it had gathered enough signatures and proceeded, would have triggered a binding referendum. Okay. So it is a binding referendum. So if you go through the petition process, you can get a binding referendum question. I mean, like, the question I would want, can we switch to a proportional representation model rather than this first past the post crap that we currently have to deal with? Like, that would be a good binding referendum question. Anyway, so the petition would have triggered a binding referendum, meaning a yes vote would have legally obligated the government to begin separating proceeding. That's a key difference from Smith's new October question, which is explicitly non-binding. Why did the court actually shut it down? The courts didn't rule on whether the binding referendum was legal or not. The judge objected was narrower and more procedural. The ruling found that there was inadequate consultation with First Nations. Like, in my opinion, that is only a problem because it's binding. And if it's a binding question, then you have to have subtleties worked out, like what happens with the First Nations tribes and stuff like that. That all has to be worked out if it's a binding question. Non-binding question, these are things you have to work out if there's enough support of people that say yeah. Right? It is yes, not no. There's no way that question survives. There's no way. The referendum was shut down because of how the process was carried out, skipping Indigenous consultation. Not what the question was asking. The bindingness of it wasn't the legal problem. In my opinion, that should be the legal problem. The lack of consultation was. That said, a binding separation referendum would almost certainly face much bigger constitutional hurdles down the road, particularly given Canada's Clarity Act, which sets federal conditions for recognizing any province's vote to separate. That battle hasn't happened yet. The court, I thought, well before that. I mean, it looks like unless they can confuse people well enough, they're gonna fail. I mean, if this is beside, like, no, Alberta stays in Canada. Yes, the governments are, like, this should be beside the yes, no. If you're gonna keep this question. Because if you ask anyone that question and be like yes, no, and you just cover the what it actually says down here, I mean, like, you're going to confuse probably half the people. You're not going to get a good idea if people actually want to leave with a confusing question.
Of thousands of Albertans who
I don't know if I'll watch this whole thing, but we'll watch the part where she at least talks about the referendum question.
Volunteered, prepared petitions, made their case to fellow citizens, and appear to have secured the required amount of signatures necessary under Alberta law.
After you lowered it, like, you did make the process easier for
law to hold a provincial referendum. The fact is that between the Forever Canada petition requesting a referendum on Alberta remaining in Canada,
yep,
and the Stay Free Alberta petition requesting a referendum on leaving Canada, approximately 700,000 Albertans have signed a petition.
700,000. What's the population of Alberta? I mean, that's a good number of people to get out and sign something.
Requesting a vote on this issue. And I, as Premier, will not have a legal mistake by a single judge silence the voices of hundreds of thousands of Albertans. That's not the Alberta way. Alberta's future will be decided by Albertans, not the courts. Our government will therefore be appealing the decision to Alberta's Court of Appeal and, if necessary, the Supreme Court of Canada.
I wonder how much work they put into getting the flags like that. Like, you gotta hang them up, you gotta hold them. They put a lot of work into that backdrop.
But this process will take many months and possibly years before being addressed by those higher courts. In the meantime, under our legal system, this troubling court decision is...
Maybe I need a flag in the background, meticulously curved and bent at the right angle.
Is binding law in Alberta until it is
so.
successfully appealed. This means that it is unlikely the courts will permit Elections Alberta to hold a binding provincial referendum on separation until this incorrect ruling is overturned or clarified. But there is another way to hear from Albertans while we wait for our legal appeal to be heard. That is why I'm announcing today that I will be requesting our government.
I mean, like, You don't even need to do the legal appeal if you don't get support for leaving, right? That whole legal appeal, that only needs to be done if you get like more than 50% support to leave, or a yes vote. This is what people need to see before going in to vote, right? No, Alberta stays in Canada. Yes, the government starts the legal process towards a binding separation referendum. I do hope they change the
Government add an additional question to the October 19th referendum vote announced previously. The additional question will be, should Alberta remain a province of Canada? Or should the government of Alberta commence the legal process required under the Canadian Constitution to hold a binding provincial referendum on whether or not Alberta should separate from Canada?
So yeah, wait, no. Yes, no, yes. This should not be a yes or no question. Yes or no should have nothing to do with this. The responses should be just this. Give me a checkbox beside this one and this one, rather than no and yes.
Because this proposed referendum question does not directly trigger separation, but if successful, would ask Alberta's government to commence the legal process necessary to hold a binding referendum on the matter, the recent court ruling would not be applicable, and the referendum question I outlined could proceed. This question will also ensure the 700,000 signatories to both the Forever Canada petition and the Stay Free Alberta petition are respected, and the will of Albertans is heard. Kicking the can down the road only prolongs a very emotional and important debate.
I completely agree with her here. You get this many signatures for the Forever Canada and Stay Free Alberta. Like, you have to have the referendum. They've gone through the process. They've done your legally required collection of signatures. Now you have to have a question about it.
And muzzling the voices of hundreds of thousands of Albertans wanting to be heard is unjustifiable in a free and democratic society. It's time to have a vote. Understand the will of Alberta.
Can we put a proportional representation question on as well? Like, should we switch to a proportional representation style of government? That's the question I want.
On this subject.
That's the question I would be interested in.
And move on. Now, obviously, Alberta's first ever provincial vote on our province's future in Canada is of monumental importance. As such, I feel it is important to clearly state my personal position so Albertans know where I stand.
She doesn't move her hands at all. She's had them like tucked together in the exact same position the whole time. How do you talk like that? I have to always be moving when I talk.
I first want to assure Albertans that our government will respect the outcome and direction received on all of the referendum questions being voted on this October 19th.
So I will take a further look into these as we get closer, to break down each question and what they fully mean.
Our government has already launched the website, albertareferendum2026.ca, with a significant amount of background information on the immigration and constitutional questions previously announced, and I hope every Albertan will take the time to explore that website in detail. As to the specific issue of separation, I have repeatedly stated that the position of the UCP caucus and UCP government is to build a strong and sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. I have never deviated from that position, and I will not do so now. I will therefore be voting for Alberta to remain in Canada while continuing to work.
She doesn't say if that's a yes or a no. Does she even know? Okay, we're just going to keep watching.
Each and every day to restore and strengthen provincial rights under the Canadian Constitution. The fact is, Canada was founded on this very principle. Canada is very different from the United States and many other Western democracies. For example, the United States centralizes the majority of power and decision-making in its federal government.
What happened?
In Canada, we chose a decentralized federation composed of very unique and diverse provinces left to govern themselves in almost all matters, with the main exceptions of national defense and international affairs. Over time, our federal government has sought to move towards a more centralized American-style system, with Ottawa attempting to take over many provincial areas of jurisdiction, using all manner of legislative, judicial, and financial leverage. I categorically reject Ottawa's attempts to do so and call on all provincial leaders and MPs to undo the extensive damage that centralization of power in Ottawa has done to our country economically and with respect to national unity. I am fiercely loyal to both Alberta.
So she's saying that the federal government has been centralizing power. Which is like Canada, the provinces tended to have more leeway and more say than they do in like a state would in the United States. See, I don't know. I don't know the right way of breaking up powers between the federal government and the provincial government. But I will say, whatever Justin Trudeau did, just undo that, because that was horrible. And that had terrible effects. And if that was centralization, then that was not working. And we want to undo that.
And Canada. But I truly believe our country is so much stronger and more prosperous when we respect the rights of provinces and empower them to govern themselves with minimal federal interference. Albertans, not Ottawa. Quebecers, not Ottawa. And all the other provinces must each be empowered to control our own direction and destiny, whether it's energy policy, agricultural practices, policing, firearms ownership, or how to administer our social programs. The days of Ottawa dictating and interfering in provincial affairs must come to an end. The future economic success and unity of our country depends on it. When I was first elected Premier, I was very concerned that it would be almost impossible to restore provincial rights stolen from Alberta and other provinces by the Trudeau-Singh government in Ottawa. However, our government went to work anyway to see if we could. We have been relentless in making our voices heard.
Are we sure it's not AI? Like, those hands have not moved. Like, not at all. Like, I think that's actually hard to talk. Yeah, I guess I keep interrupted, but like, she's 6 minutes in now, and like, no movement at all. This is
launching
weird.
dozens of legal actions, appearing in hundreds of national interviews, bridge building with other premiers, and aggressively passing legislation, such as the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act, to take back our provincial autonomy from the federal government. We ran extensive advertising campaigns against the destructive net zero electricity regulations.
Net zero is one of those things that just lost massively. Like, I personally think that, like, I'm not against all environmental policy, but you protect the environment through investment, not through restriction. You make clean energy cheaper. That is how you protect the environment. Trying to enforce a net zero. They did this in England, and you know what they did? They took the most carbon-intensive parts of their process, and they just moved it overseas. So that their country, yeah, look, we don't produce any carbon. Yeah, the part of our production now happens in China, where they have no restrictions, and they're not incentivized to try and reduce carbon at all. And so that part is actually dirtier and more carbon intensive than ever. But like, look at our country, you know, not here. I personally think the best thing to do is, one, if you push if you push the net zero, you're just gonna push certain parts of the process out of your country. You need to keep that in your country, and you need to invest into making it cleaner. That is how you fix it. Because once you put the work in to actually make, I don't know, making steel and having the process of making steel use less or produce less carbon, then that is something that can be copied elsewhere. And that is how you reduce emissions globally, rather than just, oh yeah, we'll just produce steel in another country that doesn't have any restrictions on net zero or carbon. Like the net zero stuff, I see where it comes from. It's destructive. It's going to cause issues. It's going to weaken your economy, and it is going to produce more carbon, just in another country and not yours.
As well as the catastrophic oil and gas production cap, in order to persuade our fellow Canadians that Trudeau's anti-Alberta agenda was also anti-Canadian and was destroying the unity, energy, and economic future of our nation. A great majority of Albertans joined us in that fight, calling friends, relatives, and participating in social media to spread that message throughout the country. We made a lot of noise as a province. We fought hard and refused to accept the status quo. And the result? Well, my friends, we have started to win. Over the course of the last 2 years, the tide of national public opinion on resource development, provincial rights, energy policy, and a host of other issues began to turn.
So we're seeing this in many Western nations, like not just Canada. So there's a new pipeline, oil and gas production caps gone, consumer carbon tax gone, Alberta net zero power regulations gone, EV mandate gone, export tax threats gone, tanker ban adjusted, greenwashing provisions gone. Like I think a lot of countries are coming to realize that the net zero stuff was doing far more harm than good. Like not only was it hurting their own economies, it was just outsourcing the carbon intensive aspect as well, which is not good in the long term. And so we saw this exact thing, like the net zero, removing the net zero was one of the big things of reform in England and massive gains. Trump, obviously, drill baby drill. Pretty clear where he stands on all this. I do think that like clean energy is the future, and I think we get there through investment into clean energy, not restricting dirty energy. That's how you get there.
Our Alberta oil sands went from a national target to a national treasure. Pipelines went from...
I mean, it always should have been a national. I mean, our uranium deposits are also a national. I think nuclear is probably going to be the next big source of energy. And you see development into that right now. And I think we've got like the largest uranium deposits in the world. Let me double check that. Where does Canada rank for uranium deposits? I think Russia's up there too, but size-wise, that makes sense. So, Australia. Percentage of global known resources. Australia, Pakistan, and Canada, Russia, Namibia. Australia is actually the biggest one. I mean, 10% will always be able to meet our needs. While Australia has the most uranium in the ground, they do not utilize or mine the majority of it. Because of this, Canada jumps to the second largest producer and exporter of uranium in the world, accounting for roughly 24% of global production. Pakistan leading the pack by a wide margin at 39%. Okay. We're almost done.
Possible to a national imperative. Justin Trudeau's anti-Alberta, anti-energy policies became a national embarrassment, one of several that ultimately cost.
I mean, like he was so bad for the country. Like you see Trudeau get in, and then all the charts start going the wrong way. They all start going the wrong way, and then COVID happened, and people were generally more accepting of government overreach during COVID, and so we got another term. And they continued to all go the wrong way. So now we got 8 years of a hole to dig ourselves out of rather than 4.
His prime ministership. The Leave It in the Ground NDP, led by Jagmeet Singh, was electorally annihilated. And the federal Liberals, led by their new leader, Prime Minister Mark Carney, adopted most of Alberta's positions on energy and resource development.
I mean, that's what I say. Like, there's so much a lot of the Alberta Believe stuff is because of Trudeau and his positions. The current government in Ottawa actually, we saw it. Where's her little church? Like, far taken most of Alberta's positions on energy.
In fact, the current Prime Minister has worked very constructively with our government to craft an Alberta-Ottawa Energy Agreement, or MOU, as it is often called. This has already attracted tens of billions of dollars in investment for new pipelines.
Yeah, like we also got a pipeline, another one going down to the U.S. That was in the sign-off process in Ottawa. I mean, Washington. Like, as much as clean energy is the future, dirty energy is the present. And as much as we'd like to live in the future, we do have to live in the present.
Natural gas run data centers.
Like, this oil shock that we're seeing, North America has, like, the US is the biggest oil producer in the world. Canada is one of the largest oil producers in the world. We're going to be fine, but you're going to see a lot of countries really struggle because of the oil shock that's happening. And I think it'll get pretty bad. Like, Cuba levels bad.
Electricity generation, and so much more. Under that energy agreement with Ottawa, the destructive federal electricity regulations are gone. The economically disastrous oil and gas production cap has been scrapped. New pipelines carrying nearly 1 million barrels of Alberta oil to the United States are proceeding with speed toward construction. And a new 1 million barrel a day pipeline to the BC West Coast is well in progress and on track to have its permitting completed by September of next year. Could and should these reforms and projects move faster? Yes, of course they should. The federal government can and needs to act with even more urgency than it has. Do we in Alberta still have our differences with the federal Liberal government? Obviously. And make no mistake, we will relentlessly challenge them to respect our provincial rights and jurisdiction every time they step over the line. But my fellow Albertans, there can be no doubt that things are a world of difference better for our province than they were under the Trudeau NDP government. Both major federal parties, the federal Conservatives and now the federal Liberals, representing 85% of voters in Canada, are advocating for Alberta to increase our energy production and exports. Only some extremists in the NDP, Bloc Québécois, and Green parties, representing less than...
we have, like, the third largest known reserves of oil. We should be increasing production. Where is it? Like, number 1 was Venezuela. I mean, it was a collapse. Trump went in there, he abducted the leader, and maybe they're back on track. I don't know. But where? Yeah, wasn't the second one Russia? Largest oil producing countries. I should have probably said largest oil reserve countries. So, US, Russia, but like they're in a war. And I think Ukraine is getting better and better at targeting Russian oil infrastructure. I think they're the second largest reserves. Um, they're in an active war. Which means when we okay, let me make sure of that. What countries have the largest known oil reserves? Venezuela's first. Venezuela. Okay, so it's not Russia. So Venezuela's first. We're actually fourth. Reserves, billions, global share. I guess this keeps changing, right? They find. So Venezuela is first. Lap state. Maybe recovering now. Nice if Venezuela recovered. Saudi Arabia. So that's a pretty stable country. It's close to Iran and the conflict, and most of their oil did pass through the Strait of Hormuz. I imagine they'll build pipelines. They've already got one across their country, and they'll expand that so that they're not at the mercy of that strait anymore. But like interrupted oil supply. Iran, currently at war with the U.S. I don't think I got to go too far into that. Canada, like fourth largest reserves, like a stable country. You know, nothing's gonna interrupt this flow of oil. Like there's protests that stop pipelines, but that's about it. But the government seems to be more committed to our oil infrastructure nowadays. Iraq, that all goes through the Strait of Hormuz, and they don't have any other option. UAE, their pipeline, because they had a big pipeline that avoided the Strait of Hormuz. It got bombed. Yeah, Iran targeted it. I don't think it knocked it offline, but it was like a threatening that we could knock this offline. And that's how they were getting oil out. Why? Like, that part of the world is so oil rich. Kuwait is another one that goes through the Strait of Hormuz almost, no, entirely. That one's a little locked up at the top of the strait. And then you get into Russia and the US, which are having war, and then obviously another stable. Nothing's going to affect the supply there. Libya. Okay. I've stopped this too many times. Let's try and get to
Than
the end.
15% of voters in Canada hold fast to their anti-Alberta, leave it in the ground rhetoric. This complete turning of Canadian government policy and national public opinion was unthinkable just a few short years ago. No one thought it was possible, except here in Alberta. We turned the tide. We are winning hearts and minds to our cause right across the...
Well, I mean, like, the tide shifted in every country. It shifted most heavily in the US. And then it shifted, I think it was the start of the Ukraine-Russian war, when energy at the first, like, in my opinion, Russia was the first one to use access to oil as a weapon on the geopolitical. They tried to starve Eastern Europe of energy, and largely Eastern Europe has now moved away from Russian oil, but like they've moved towards oil that comes from the Strait of Hormuz, which apparently is also not safe. That's another story. So it was shown that oil could be used as a weapon, and all of a sudden, your energy security became so much more important. And we saw the shift in the US, and the shift was slightly delayed, but we see the shift happening in Canada. A necessity of making sure you control your supply of energy. Because, like, if you want to see what happens when you don't control your supply of energy, just look up anything about Cuba right now. That's what happened. It's like total collapse.
The country, as many of our fellow Canadians are coming to understand that a strong Alberta and strong provinces means a stronger and more prosperous Canada. Now, to those hundreds of thousands of Albertans who are still not convinced or are unsatisfied with the pace of change and believe that separation is the answer, I want you to know that I empathize with you and I understand why you feel that way. You are justifiably frustrated and angry with Ottawa. You are proud and loyal Albertans that have watched our province be taken advantage of repeatedly over past decades, and you want it to stop. So do I, more than anything. Like you, I love this province and our people so much. I am so proud to be Albertan. But I asked you to please consider joining me to vote for Alberta to remain in Canada and not...
Still no word on yes or no from her.
Give up on our beautiful country just as we're gaining respect and the tide has turned in our favor. Not when our fellow Canadians, even those that may support different political parties, are nonetheless supporting Alberta's vision for a prosperous, energy-rich nation with strong provinces building a Canada we can be proud of again. In my view, now is not the time to give up hope in our country, not when we have fought so hard for so long and come so far. I believe Canada can still work. I believe it's working better every day, and it can work even better in the future if we keep fighting together for it. Together with our fellow Canadians, we have built a Canada that is loved and respected all over the world. Our men and women have died together fighting for our freedoms and the safety of hundreds of millions around the globe. Canadians were there in Europe, fighting and making the ultimate sacrifice in the Second World War long before we were joined in that effort by our American allies. Together with our allies, we were also instrumental in beating back the forces of communism and terrorism. The world would be a much darker place if not for Canada. We have built marvels of technology together. We are known the world over as a country of innovators.
I mean, right now, they're looking at like modular nuclear creation, like modular nuclear reactors in Canada. It's one of the things that they're debating on putting money into, and it looks like that may be the future of energy. Like if it, not the current iteration, that technology could be the future. And I'm looking forward to it. Like that sounds
explorers
awesome.
And entrepreneurs, but also of peacemakers.
Because like clean energy, that would be the easiest bar to hit. The problem with clean energy is that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, and our ability to store energy is not great. Batteries still suck at storing large amounts of energy. They've gotten a lot better, and if there's a breakthrough in battery technology, maybe that'll be the solution. But right now you need consistent generation, and nuclear just seems like the best choice.
Philanthropists and contributors to the good of the world. Our federal politicians may stray from our foundational values from time to time, but our fellow Canadians, they are our family, our friends, our blood. We all know our family needs to do some work to get rid of a few bad habits developed over the past decade, but that's what we are in the process of fixing. Now is the time to double down and fight even harder for the prosperity and change we want to see in our country. Because Albertans are at our best when we are hard at work getting things done for each other and our families, solving problems, serving our communities, creating and innovating, building a stronger Alberta and a stronger Canada. And now is our chance to do so. Finally, with a Chinook wind at our backs instead of a winter blizzard in our face. Finally, I wish to speak with those of you who already agree with me that Alberta should remain in Canada.
Okay.
Let us guard against the trap of using division and demonization tactics against our fellow Albertans with whom we disagree on this matter. The vast majority of those advocating for separation love our province profoundly. Many are also proud Canadians that have simply lost hope that their families can flourish within Canada. So instead of attacking these loyal Albertans, let's work together to restore hope in their country again. Let's work together to hold Ottawa accountable for implementing the Alberta-Ottawa energy deal and get that pipeline built to the West Coast.
Yes.
Let's work together to get Ottawa to stand down on their unfair persecution of law-abiding gun owners. Let's work together to build an immigration system that helps support our economy while putting Alberta workers and taxpayers first. Let's demonstrate why Alberta can be stronger and more prosperous as a member of a renewed and unified Canada, one that is moving past the last 10 years to empower provinces to develop and export our resources and to govern our own provincial affairs free from federal interference. Let's use the power of hope and persuasion and reject the language of division and demonization. We are, after all, each other's neighbors, friends, and family. We must never let the voices of hatred and vilification divide us as a people. Because at the end of this debate, and when the referendum is over, we must come together to ensure that our beloved province continues to prosper. And that is my hope, that our beloved Alberta and Canada will remain forever strong and free. Thank you and good night.
Okay, so that was her speech on it. It was good. My personal opinion on this is, if you have a citizen-led petition like this, like, I don't think a citizen-led petition should lead to a binding referendum, but I think you should, like, if you have a citizen-led petition and it meets the legal requirements, you should be able to get a non-binding referendum. And that's essentially what they're doing now. It's confusing. The question is confusing. I would like that question to not be confusing. The whole time she didn't even say if she was going to vote yes or no, because, like, probably knows she's going to have to change the question, because it's almost intentionally designed to make it look like more people want to leave than they do. With just how they've worded the question, like, nothing in the question indicates that a yes is for this and a no is for that. You would need almost to put that beside the yes and the no. Like chat, like Claude did for me. Or it's no, Alberta stays in Canada. Yes, the government starts the legal process. Because this question is just terrible. Terrible. Like, you're going to get people that are going to get confused and be like, okay, I don't understand it. Should Alberta remain province of Canada? I agree. You vote yes. The government starts the legal process towards building a binding separation. You literally, like, if you get confused, the answer is the opposite of what you'd want. Which doesn't make any sense. Now, that could be intentional. Like, did a separatist write this question for you? Or maybe they want it to look like there's more support than there is. I don't know. Anyway, question I don't like, but I like. But I would like to have an actual good question in reference. Putting the question to the people, I think, is always the better thing to do. Get actual confirmation on where people stand on a subject. I think that's just better. Anyway, yeah. So I'm gonna move on. We will start. Oh, I closed you. word again?
Emeritus.
Emeritus. Professor. Hired on. Distinguished group. Okay. So I'm gonna go grab a drink. I'll be back in a second. I have to cut this. Good. All right. I'll be back in a minute. There we go. They got music. Oh, I gotta go back to this. Oh. Double check everything is still working. Yes. 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 Oh, I didn't change my top. Okay. Well, we're gonna do that this time. So we need to pick another democracy to look at. And we're going to compare this one because we compared the last one against Canada, which I compared against somewhere I know. But I'm going to compare one against the US this time. I hear good things about New Zealand. I always hear a lot about New. We're gonna go New Zealand versus. Let's see. Show. Okay, I gotta update it. Let's get the questions started because these things think for a while. Okay. Can you give me a detailed breakdown of the New Zealand democracy? Can you compare and contrast this to the US democracy? Can you give me pros and cons for each democracy? Okay, yeah. Is that how I spell New Zealand? Perfect. I think this is getting better. Okay, can you give me a detailed breakdown of the New Zealand democracy. Can you compare and contrast this to the US democracy? Response for each. Can you compare and contrast the two different democracies? Okay, that should be enough. That should be enough. Let me fix this while this versus US democracy go down. I got it right the first time. That rarely happens. So used to needing to correct. Okay, Twitch, edit. Still says we're talking about the Greece economic flap. Greece economic meltdown. how long ago was that? Oh, I gotta do this bit. That's what people read, right? Okay. Hey, show me live. New Zealand's democracy. Let's see if there's a short video. 12 minutes. How democracy works in New Zealand. Plain simple. That kind of looks like what we want. Way too long. Parliament. White man behind a desk. I mean, he's looking at the same subject matter I'm looking into. we might watch that if this doesn't give us a good enough description. Okay, so we are going to compare and contrast New Zealand, and we're going to compare it to the United States. So we've looked at the United States before, so I've got a good idea of how their system works. Get into it. How's the sound? Sound, we're good. Okay, system of government. New Zealand is a parliamentary constitutional monarchy, the British monarchy. So it's based off the same system as Canada. Currently, King Charles III is the head of state. I think that's still the same for Canada. Represented locally by a governor general. Real governing power rests with the parliament and the elected prime minister. Okay, so it looks like New Zealand's is very similar to Canada. I guess it's a good thing I'm comparing it to the US. Democratic Index chart. Yeah, let me have a look. So here we are. Hide my. These are the democracies. Economic Intelligence Unit. Canada's 8.69. Norway. New Zealand, number 2, 9.61. And it looks like they have the same base system that we have. So I'm actually interested in what they do differently than us, because we're 8.69. They're at 9.61, almost a whole point ahead. Even further ahead of the US. Let's have look. Oh my god. Structure of Parliament. New Zealand has a unicameral. I mean, like, all of the good ones do it with one system. All of the ones at the top seem to be doing it with one system. Unicameral. New Zealand has a unicameral parliament called the House of Representatives with 120 seats. What's the population? Population of New Zealand. Like, they're quite a bit smaller. Yeah, so their population is similar to Alberta's population. Alberta had 5 million. There is no upper house. Senate was abolished in 1950. I mean, good job. Good job, New Zealand. We're still trying to get rid of ours here. It's annoying. This makes lawmaking faster and less bureaucratic. Oh. Electoral system, MMPs, mixed member proportional. Okay, so Canada uses a first past the post system. Denmark was proportional representation. And this is a mixed member proportional. How is this different? This is one of New Zealand's most distinctive features. Voters cast 2 votes. Party vote determines the overall proportion of seats each party gets in Parliament. Electorate vote elects a local representative for their geographic area. So they have broken the system up. You are voting for power in your federal government through the party vote, and the electorate vote is your elected representative. How does that work? You can't send 2 people, right? Maybe they do, because they're casting 2 votes. This system was adopted in 1996 and is designed to make parliament composition closely reflect the overall share of votes each party receives nationally, making it far more proportional than the winner-take-all system. Okay. So it looks like they move right on. So I want to understand the mixed member proportional. Can you go into more detail for me about the mixed member proportional voting system? Are they electing 2 different people? How does this compare to the first past the post system in Canada? Okay. Ooh. Yeah, we'll get back to that. We'll get back to that. I have to understand this. Okay. Mixed member proportional voting. Okay. Yes, voters are essentially making 2 separate decisions on the same ballot. Let's break this down thoroughly. The ballot paper: when a New Zealand voter walks into a polling booth, they receive a single ballot with 2 columns. Left side, electoral vote. Choose 1 local person. Party vote. Choose 1 party. So the person you vote locally doesn't have to match the party you want to vote for. So then, is the left side of the ballot more like a municipal government? Like, are you voting for the municipal government and the federal government? These are two completely independent choices. A voter can, for example, vote for a national party candidate on the left side and give their party vote to the Green Party on the right. This is called ticket splitting and is perfectly legal and common. Vote number 1, the electorate vote, left side. New Zealand is divided into 72 geographic electorates. Constitution. So we call those riding, including 7 dictated Maori electorate. Each electorate elects 1 local MP, member of parliament. Its uses first past the post. Don't like first. Whoever gets the most votes in that electorate wins the seat. This MP is called an electorate MP and represents that specific geographic community. They go to parliament regardless of how their party performs nationally. Think of this as your local representative vote. Okay. Okay. Example, you live in Wellington Central electorate, 5 candidates are running. The Labour candidate gets 38%, the National gets 30, the Greens get 22, others get 10. The Labour candidate wins, even with only 38% of the vote in that electorate. Well, you can only send 1 person. That makes sense. Vote number 2, the party vote, right side. This is the more powerful of the 2 votes. It determines the overall makeup of parliament. Every party's share of the National Party vote determines what percentage of the 120 seats they are entitled to. This is purely proportional. If a party gets 30% of the party vote nationally, they get roughly 30% of the parliament seats, about 36 seats. Think of this as your government direct vote. Okay. So you're electing a local person and you're electing a party. But like, what if numbers don't match? Okay, so percentage of the vote, how many seats? Okay, I definitely missed something here. Example of how seats are allocated nationally. So we'll look at the National Party. They got 38% of seats. They get 46 of the 120 seats. Electorate seats 1. So this means the people on the left side, 30 of them won. List seats needed. So that means they have 16 seats that they have to fill. How the 2 votes connect. List empty. Here's where it gets clever. After electorate seats are filled, so they're entitled to this many seats, they have this many people that got elected. After electorate seats are filled, Parliament needs to be topped up to match each party's proportional entitlement. This is done through party lists. Before each election, every party publishes a ranked list of candidates, their party list. If a party is entitled to more seats than they've won in electorates, they fill the gap by pulling candidates off their list in order. Electorate MPs won their local seats directly. List MPs enter Parliament through the party list top-up. Okay. So, is there 120 ridings? Oh, no. 72 geographic electorates. So there's more seats than there is people being elected. So The left side, there's more national seats than there are people that'll you'll be able to put into them. So you'll always, I mean, not guaranteed, but you're almost always going to end up with list seats needed. And each party brings up additional people to make up the list seats. So the people you vote for, they all go and they have power. So the left side, everyone goes there, they have power. And then the right side, you're giving additional power to a party. That party is then able, like, they'll post their list of people that they're going to pull up and into the party if they have room based off their entitled seat. This sounds horribly confusing. But also, like, considered the second best in the world. So let's continue. Example, Labor wins 20 elected seats but is entitled to 32 based off their party vote. Labor will pull the next 12 candidates off their pre-published list to fill the gap. Those 12 people are now list MPs. They represent the whole country, not a specific electorate. This means parties strategically place important candidates high on their list to ensure they get into parliament even if they lose their local electorate race. Oh, that makes sense. So your list MPs will obviously contain all of the people running in, like, the 72 different geographic electorates. Those will be the party on the list. And so even if someone loses, if they're high enough on your list, they can still be pulled up to fill list seats. Okay. Those 12 people. Okay. The 5% threshold rule. To prevent Parliament from being fragmented by dozens of tiny parties, there is a minimum threshold. A party must receive either 5% of the national party vote or win at least one electorate seat to qualify for list seat. If a party gets 4.9% of the vote and wins no electorate, they get 0 seats. So you have to have a certain amount of pull in order to create a party. You have to be able to win an electorate or to have more than 5% of a national vote. I mean, those are reasonable. You have to win a place, or so get a majority in a single riding, or get 5% national. Those are reasonable. This is probably the easier, like, the whole, I don't know, like, you're still only voting for one, right? So this is designed to make it difficult for a new party to not impossible, and easier than in systems like the UK, where we recently have seen several new parties show up. But still not exactly easy. The threshold keeps Parliament manageable while still allowing smaller parties a path in. Yep. Real world scenario. A voter lives in a safe national electorate but loves green policy. Electorate vote because voting green locally is wasted. The green candidate has no chance. Party vote green. This actually gives the Greens more seats in Parliament. So this part here is similar to proportional representation, where every vote across the whole country matters. Your riding, your local area doesn't matter at all, and you just counted across the whole country. I like that aspect, because that's very similar to proportional representation. It's just they also have this aspect too. Green prefers fully counted at the national. Confusing for sure. Okay, let's go through the 3 examples that they give us. Voter B loves their local Labor MP personally, but prefers ACT's economic policy. So they vote for Labor because they like their local rep, but they vote ATC to give them national power. Both their local preference and their policy preference are honored. So, in my opinion, this is kind of like an in-between step of a first past the post and proportional representation. But they say it's done really well, right? I was looking at Denmark. Where's Denmark? And they just had a proportional representation, which is, in my opinion, far cleaner, easier to understand than the complex system we're currently looking at. Voter C is a diehard national supporter in competitive electorates. They vote electoral vote national, party vote national. You'll probably have a push to do this, right? The key reason why the mix by the MMP is considered more expressive than a single vote. Okay, so this flexibility is a key reason why. What is this system called again? The mixed member proportional system. Mixed member proportional. Flexibility is key reason the mixed member proportional is considered more expressive than single votes. Also more complicated, for sure. Overhang seats. Occasionally a party wins more electoral seats than their party vote entitles them to. In this case, Parliament temporarily expands beyond 120 seats to accommodate these overhang seats, rather than taking seats away from other parties. This keeps proportionality intact for all other. So if you get a lot of local people that win, but you don't get a lot of national, right-hand side support, all the local people that win still end up in Parliament. Canada uses pure first past the post, one of the simplest electoral systems in the world, but also one of the most criticized. We've gone into depth in this. Basically, 343 ridings. Whoever wins that riding becomes a member of Parliament, goes to represent you, and the party. Oh, I see. Getting the person that represents you and the person in the party, splitting that is interesting and apparently effective. Because there's a big issue in the US and to a lesser degree in Canada of people vote with the party, and if you don't vote with your party, you get primaried. They'll put someone else there to represent the party rather than you. Like, who was it? Massey that had a lot of youth support and just got like outspent by the Republican Party and lost his seat. Okay. Each riding elects one MP to the House of Commons. Voters cast a single vote for one candidate. The candidate with the most votes wins. Okay. Yeah, so You vote, that person the person who wins. So in Canada's system, you have to win a riding to get any kind of means you have to get the most votes specific riding to get any kind of power. And so this means that smaller parties largely don't exist because it's very difficult if you're a smaller party and you have like 5 or 10% support across the country to get a majority support in a single riding. So that party usually just doesn't. The Green Party, I think they have 1 seat in all of Canada, and they let me check this. In Canadian government, how many seats does a Green Party have? What percentage of votes did they receive in the last election? We'll just. I'm getting all thrown around here. Yeah, you need a majority in a riding town. Following the April 2025 Canadian federal election, the Federal Green Party of Canada holds 1 seat as a common. Green Party received 1.22% of the popular vote nationwide. This represents a decline from. I mean, actually, that's a tiny percent. I'm surprised they managed to get a seat at all. They managed to collect it all into one area. So the thing I always talk about is proportional representation, and this is where the country as a whole is essentially treated as like one riding, and all the votes are counted, and then parties are given power based off how many votes they got, just like the right hand side of the ballot here. Like you're given seats you're entitled to based off the vote you receive nationally rather than a local riding. So proportional representation is like the right side of the ballot without the left side. And first past the post is the left side without the right side. So they've combined the two systems into one in a pretty interesting way. Anyway, I know how Canada's system. I'm not gonna go into it in too much detail unless something stand out. Strategic voting problem in Canada. One of the first past the post biggest practical problems in Canada is strategic voting, where voters feel they cannot vote for their true preferences because it might split the vote and help elect their least preferred candidate. See, that's a problem. In the proportional representation system, your vote always matters, right? Because like you only need to get like 0.5% of a vote or something to get a seat. Depends on how many seats. So you can vote for a smaller party without feeling like your vote's being weighted, because it's done as a national thing rather than local riding. Why doesn't Canada switch? Canada has debated electoral reform repeatedly. The 2015 Trudeau Liberals famously promised 2015 will be the last federal election under first past the post, then abandoned the promise in 2017. Really? Trudeau just gave up? Several provinces have held referendums on switching. All failed. I mean, I guess people don't like change. The biggest barrier is that parties who win under first past the post are the ones who would have to vote to change it. They have little incentive to reform a system that gave them power. And that's the problem. Once you set up a system, people in power have little incentive to reform it. Many voters also find coalition governments unpredictable and prefer the clarity of majority single party rule. You say that until you have someone like Trump in office, and then you're gonna really wish you had a coalition government that better represented the people. Like, just straight up. British Columbia held another referendum in 2018. Proportional representation lost 51 to 39%. That's supposed to be MMMP, I'm guessing. Much fairer, more genuine choice, more complex to understand. I mean, but Canada has one of the most educated populations in the world. Coalitions can be slow. Like, if you coalitions is when the ruling party usually you have to get over 50% support to become a ruling party. So your group, your party has to make a coalition with other parties to get above 50% so that you can be considered a ruling coalition. Smaller parties get real seats. Yeah, that local representation. That's the downside of proportional representation, that you lose a little bit of. Okay, often, so Canada's first past the post, often deeply distorted. Strategic voting undermines true preferences. Extremely simple. Majorities can act quickly. Minority party voice. Smaller parties are crushed. You don't really see small parties. Local representation. Strong local MP connect. MMP is widely considered the more democratic system in terms of votes translating to seats, but first past the post simplicity and tendency to produce decisive majority governments remains its core appeal, and why countries that have it rarely manage to replace it, even when most electoral experts argue it should be. Once they have power, people tend not to change the system that gave them power. Okay, so now we understand the mixed member proportional. I like it. I mean, I like it more than the Canadian first past the post system. Much more. But if we were to compare it to proportional representation, I don't know. I like them both. Both more than our system. Okay. The executive. The prime minister is the head of government and is the leader of the party or coalition that commands a majority in parliament. Cabinet is drawn from elected MPs and is collectively responsible to parliament. MP can be removed by a vote of no confidence in parliament at any time. So this system all works similar as Canada. Coalition governments, because mixed member proportional makes it rare for any single party to win an outright majority. New Zealand almost always operates under coalition governments, where two or more parties agree to govern together. This encourages negotiation and compromise. The Treaty of Altingang? Oh. We're gonna figure out what this is. Or how to say it.
Waitangi.
Waitangi. The Treaty of Waitangi. Foundational document of New Zealand's democracy, signed in 1840 between the British Crown and Maori chiefs. Maori chiefs, is that it? These are like their native First Nations.
Maori.
Maori chiefs. Established a partnership principle that increasingly influences legislation, policy, and Maori representation in Parliament. Dedicated Maori seat is in the House. Key features: no written constitution. Okay, so that's different because we have a written constitution in Canada. New Zealand has no single codified constitutional document. Instead, it relies on a collection of status conventions and the Treaty of Waitangi. So that is similar how the UK does. No Bill of Rights or Supreme Law status. The Bill of Rights Act 1990 exists, but Parliament can override it. Parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament is the supreme legal authority. Elections every 3 years. That's cool. So that's just a whole year shorter than most. Canada, US, UK, they all work off a 4-year system. Just they made it 3 years, which I think is better. I'd actually argue with how fast things are moving, like how fast things are developing. Moving to even a 2-year system might be good. All right, United States democracy. We did read all about this. I'm looking for more for the comparison, but they're bicameral, the Senate and the House of Representatives. They also use first past the post. Separation of powers and checks and balances. The U.S. system is built on a strict separation of powers across 3 co-equal branches: legislative, Congress, executive, the president, and judicial. Constitution and Bill of Rights, federalism. The U.S. is a true federal system. 50 states each have their own constitution, governors, legislature, significant autonomy over areas like educational, criminal law, and taxation. Federal government and states share. Remember, when we're looking at New Zealand, it's usually the size or smaller or bigger than some states. So elections every 2 years for the House, 4 years for the President, 6 years for the Senate. Voting two-party system dominant. Okay. It's giving me charts for the rest. Here we go. Head-to-head comparison. Head of state, government. These are just the things we just read. Pros and cons. This is where we want to get. New Zealand. Let's go through pros and cons. Pros. Mixed member proportional gives fairer, more proportional representation. Smaller, more agile government. Laws pass faster. This like also a smaller place, right? Multi-party system gives voters more genuine choice. Indigenous Maori representation is structurally built in. Lower levels of political polarization. I mean, when you get to pick from more parties, you can pick someone who better represents you. Higher voter turnout and civic engagement. Ranked consistently among the world's least corrupt government. I mean, that's great. That's probably when you have more parties, corruption is a bigger deterrent because there's someone whose opinion is close enough to you that isn't corrupt that they can vote for if people dislike corruption, because you have more people, more parties being represented. Then corruption has a bigger political weight. Like in the US, if you're corrupt, well, I mean, what are you going to do? Vote for a party that doesn't align with you at all in any way? That's the big swing you have to take. Whereas the more, I personally like coalition governments, and I think the more parties there are to pick from, genuinely the better representatives you get. Cons: coalition negotiations can cause political uncertainty and delay. I mean, isn't that just debate, right? Like, you need coalitions, you need to work with other people to get stuff passed. Like, they talk about this as a negative, whereas this is fundamental of compromise. You need to compromise to get through laws. And when you compromise, you end up with something that's better for a wider range. That's just how I see it. No written constitution means right can be changed by simple parliamentary majority. I mean, there's cons and there's also pros to that. Right now, in the US, Trump's trying to go against birthright citizenship, but birthright citizenship is in their constitution. And changing that is very difficult. And I don't think he's going to be able to do it because of how difficult it is to change the Constitution. Whereas not having a Constitution, just having your government be the supreme authority, means they can make changes and they can be more agile as things change. Because, like, the problem they're facing in the US, which is people just coming over and having children in the US so that their child's a citizen, that's the problem that they couldn't possibly have predicted when they were writing their constitution. And so the issue that Trump's trying to solve is, like, it was put in the Constitution for a different reason than the issue he's trying to solve. But he can't solve it because it's in the Constitution. And when something's in the Constitution in the US, it has a much, much higher barrier to go through in order to make changes to it. Okay. Small population means less global political influence. I mean, that's just a factor of New Zealand. Unicameral parliament has fewer checks. A majority can push through controversial laws quickly. I mean, I'll be honest. Unicameral. Like, let me do a quick check. I want to know if the following countries are unicameral or bicameral in government: Norway, New Zealand, Sweden, Iceland, Switzerland, Finland, Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, Luxembourg. Let's see, because, like, as far as I understand, ooh, no, bicameral. Okay, so that's actually unicameral. Switzerland. Okay. Ireland. Okay, so there's actually a decent split between unicameral and bicameral. Not a legislative chamber, so that's not really dual cameral either. But there does seem to be at least several bicameral governments. That are also up at the top of the index. The unicameral does have its flaws. 3-year terms can feel too short to implement long-term policy. That is an issue you're always gonna have. Like, there's already like they already say this about the US and Canada with a four-year term, where that's too short to introduce long-term policy. Well, any kind of democracy, if it's democratic, is going to be too short to institute a 50-year policy. That's just how it's going to be. I would personally argue 3-year term provides more accountability to leadership in a smaller time frame. Like, technically the US, they have midterms as well, right? So it's actually a 2-year system where you can get your swings. And I personally would say that you should do the presidential election as well every 2 years. To just change the administration. But I mean, Canada just goes straight for the 4 years, right? We don't midterm. Okay. Una, bye. Is this the order that I gave them? I'll show. Hold it off to the other screen here. You guys can't see that. Okay. These are not in the order that. These are all really good scores no matter what, right? Netherlands. So it does seem like when you're looking at the democracy index, a lot of the best democracies are unicameral, but there are bicamerals that have done it well too. So anyway, I got distracted. 3-year term, I'd argue, is better than a 4-year term. I'd say a full 2-year term is probably, like, with how fast things are changing in society, like, it's led by technology, right? The issue is we have technology and technological innovation is going exponential. Right? Like, there's the law where AI or compute. What is the law around chat? What's the law around compute that says compute increases by a certain amount every so many years? Every so many. Like, this is held true for a long time. You're thinking of Moore's law. Okay, yeah. Coined by the number of transistors on a microchip double roughly every 2 years. Well, the cost of computers is halved. So this has remained true for a long time. 1965. Yes and no. We are currently hitting the physical limitations of silicon. Today, transistors are so microscopic that they are only a few atoms wide. At this scale, quantum mechanics kicks in. Electrons can literally leak through solid barriers, making it incredibly difficult to keep shrinking them. While traditional Moore's law is slowing down significantly, tech industry has adapted by finding other ways to scale compute, such as specialized chips, 3D stacking, cloud infrastructure. There's even quantum computers that are starting to show up. Like, the rate of technological advancement has been exponential. It's continuing to go exponential. Like, I was watching a documentary on synthetic life form. The life forms completely created by human. It's a thing that exists, and it's a whole new field of study, and technology is continuing to go exponential. Society, I think, is having a difficult time keeping pace. And I think the 4-year system was designed in a time where things moved slower. And with how fast things are moving today, I think you need a government that is more accountable and can change more quickly. So reducing it from like a 4-year system to a 2-year system, I think it's almost necessary. To keep up with the changing time. Actually, I'm just gonna write that down because I want to look into the. I'm gonna ask a quick question just to make sure that I'm not like misleading you guys, because I would hate to do that. I remember seeing on the news something about synthetic life forms and that they have created bacteria from scratch. Does this mean that they have written the DNA for this life form? Because I've always thought that DNA and AI is going to be one of those terrifying. Yes, that is exactly what it means, but with a fascinating catch. When scientists talk about creating synthetic life from scratch, they did write out the DNA code on a computer and chemically manufacture it in a lab. However, they didn't author a brand new biological blueprint from their own imagination. Instead, they plagiarized nature and heavily edited the text, so not completely new. The process is a masterpiece of biological software engineering, and it works in 2 distinctive ways: copying a natural blueprint and radically editing the language of life. Playing God. The original milestone, the copy-paste approach. The landmark breakthrough you likely remember happening at the J. Craig Venture Institute. Scientists created JCVI Synth 1.0. The world's first self-replicating synthetic cell. That is indeed what I remember hearing about. Instead of inventing a brand new organism, they took a known simple bacterial called mycoplasma. I'm not going to be able to finish that. Read its genetic code and type those exact 108 million chemical letters into a computer. Design the software. Scientists, okay, we're just going to go through it real quick. Design the software, print the DNA, empty a host cell, boot up. They took a living related bacterial cell and completely emptied out its native DNA, leaving behind just the empty cellular shell. Boot up the cell. They transplanted the synthetic DNA into an empty shell. The cell accepted the new software, read the instructions, and successfully booted up as a living, reproducing synthetic organism. Whoa. going deeper, rewriting the language of life. Since the initial breakthrough, synthetic biology has advanced from merely copying nature to radically rewriting it. Every living thing on Earth uses the same basic genetic language, 64 combinations of letters called codon, build protein. Because nature has some redundancy, multiple codons often do the exact same job. Teams of scientists have capitalized on this redundancy to build organisms with completely altered, streamlined blueprint. Synth 61. Scientists at Cambridge essentially compressed a genetic code of E. coli, replacing thousands of natural codons with synthetic alternatives, reducing the bacteria's vocabulary from 64 codons down to 61. Synth 57. Researchers pushed the boundaries even further, compressing the blueprint down to a record-breaking 57 codons. This required executing more than 101,000 precise modifications to the organism's entire genetic code. I'm not going to pretend I understand any of this. So codons are combinations. 64 combinations of letters called codon. Build proteins. Okay, so they're shrinking the genetic code by removing redundancy, but keeping it functionally the same, from what I understand. By removing these redundant words from the genetic dictionary, scientists can repurpose the deleted code to force the bacteria to build entirely new materials like custom therapeutics. So they're making room to insert their own code into a living organism, a living reproducing organism. So if you can insert a code that allows it to create a specific molecule, that molecule is something you can use, you'd have a self-replicating way of creating whatever that molecule is. That's wild. Like think of the drugs and like just they're going to be able to make just wild things, like things what your body can actually produce. Okay. Custom therapeutics, or to build entirely new materials. Furthermore, because these synthetic organisms speak a completely different genetic language than natural life, they are entirely immune to natural viruses. The viral structure simply looks like gibberish to them. Well, like you're building something entirely new. There's no way a virus, like organisms have grown up with viruses. This is why like they're inseparable. As soon as you make something new, a virus, unless it's very similar to something that already exists, has no way of actually like interacting. From scratch nuance. While scientists truly write and manufacture the DNA from raw chemicals, they still rely on a living, pre-existing host cell's physical body to read that DNA. We can manufacture the genetic software from scratch, but we still have to borrow nature's hardware to run it. I mean, that's wild. And also a massive distraction from New Zealand and what I was talking about. Anyway, I was here. 3-year terms is shorter. US kind of has a 2-year term system, but it's shorter than many others, and I think a shorter terms is something we're going to need more of in the future. Dependence on coalition partners can water down policy mandates. We call that compromise, and I think that's a good thing. Geographic isolation can limit international democratic league. That's just their geographic. Okay. I've heard New Zealand has an issue with brain drain. But I think that's just because kind of like how people in the country move to cities. People in smaller countries tend to move to bigger countries with bigger cities. And that's just one of the flows of things that happen. Because in bigger cities you can find better startups and stuff like that. I'm going to confirm that before. I heard that New Zealand has a brain drain issue. Can you go into details on what's driving this? Okay, while it does that, we're going to continue. United States pros strong written constitution with protected individual rights, robust checks and balances preventing any one branch from dominating. Federalism allows states to experiment with different policies. That's largely a pro from its size. Like New Zealand obviously can't have something like that. It's only 5 million people compared to like 340 million or something. Independent judiciaries with strong judicial review. Not if Trump has a say about it. Long democratic tradition and institutional stability. That's good. It's always good. Large, diverse democracy that influences global norms. Yep. High constitutional barrier protection against rapid radical change. I mean, not always great, in my opinion. Sometimes, like in the US, one of the things we see is that the federal government doesn't pass a lot, or at least before Trump. Federal government didn't really, I mean, even with Trump, the House of Representatives doesn't do a whole, like it doesn't get a whole lot actually done. And that you got to change with the times. I feel that that's something that actually works against them. Okay. Let's see if it figures it out at the time. We'll go into cons for the US. Electoral college can result in a president who loses the popular vote. We've seen that one happen. First past the post system effectively locks out third parties and limited voters' choice. I mean, that's the big one. This is why I hate the first past the post. Like, don't get me wrong. Back in like when they were creating this for both the US and Canada, when they were making it, first past the post made sense. It was a system when our best form of transportation was a horse, person on a horse with a letter. It made sense. In today's world, like we're a little bit more advanced, and there is better systems for democracy than the first past the post. I always start inching closer and closer to the mic. Okay. Extreme polarization and gridlock makes bipartisan legislation very difficult. This is the whole, you don't see the federal government doing a whole lot. Senate gives small population state disproportionate power. I think that was just part of their design. It looks like that was just part of their design. I don't know why. That's just how it is. Slow, complex lawmaking process, two chambers, presidential veto, filibuster. Okay. Money plays an outside role in election. That's a dangerous one. That's a really dangerous. Lifetime Supreme Court appointments can entrench ideological imbalances. Oh, the Supreme Court, because in the US, like in New Zealand, the elected body is the highest power. Everything else is below. And in the United States, you kind of have three centers of power. You have your elected body, you have your president, and then you have the court system. The Supreme Court is an appointment that lasts a lifetime. And it's one of their centers of power. There's supposed to be three equal centers of power. So Supreme Court appointments are very, very important towards the future of the United States. So if you get a bad Supreme Court justice in there, you can entrench ideological imbalance. Okay. Brain drain. The brain drain has been massive, taking point in New Zealand, hitting record-breaking levels over the last couple of years. Give you an idea of the scale. Official data from Stats New Zealand shows that New Zealand has been seeing a record net migration loss of roughly 36,000 to 37,000 local citizens annually. So 5 million, they're losing a net 37,000 annually. While overall population numbers stay positive because of new immigrant arriving, the country is experiencing a massive churn, losing high-earning, educated citizens and replacing them with overseas labor. The cost of living versus low wages. This is the primary engine driving people out. New Zealand has developed a reputation for having London prices on local wages. I mean, the cost of living thing, I think, is an issue in much of the Western world. The issue is, in my personal opinion, that governments, they started this whole, your house is your biggest investment you'll ever make. And they pushed that hard. It's like generations of, your house is your biggest investment. Your house price will only ever go up. And for a long time it did. House prices only ever went up. There was the crash, 2008, right? The housing market crash in the US, where that mindset was broken. Canada didn't have that same correction, and so the cost of living continued to go up. We had a better system in place at the time, but because that we never felt that pain, the idea that, oh, your house is your biggest investment and the price will only ever go up, continued, and it drove house prices, which the primary aspect of cost of living. It drove house prices exponential, like just crazy. Like it drove them exponential. I go further back. Let me tell you. So there was the crash way off this chart. But the house prices continued to largely go up. COVID, and it even spiked. And now, like for the first real time, we are seeing consistent lower house prices, where the whole, your house is your biggest investment, it'll only ever go up, like that's been shattered, right? You now have to factor in your house might not be worth what you pay for it in another 5 or 10. Statistically, this will continue up. Like, this was an overinflation and there's a correction, but house prices is because of inflation, right? they always try to aim for a 2% inflation. Like house prices will continue to go up, but for how long are they going to come down? We didn't have a crash like in the US. They're trying to, in my opinion, they're trying to deflate it slowly back to proper levels, which means, I mean, in my opinion, the pain just continues longer. As long as house prices continue to be elevated, which in my opinion they still are, based off the cost of living, the more pain it's going to cause in society. Okay, what was I talking about before this? All right, I got distracted. Key contrast, the big picture. Let's continue on. Proportionality versus stability. New Zealand's... I want to know what was causing the brain tremor. The unstoppable pull of Australia. Australia has always been the default destination for departing New Zealanders, but a major policy shift supercharged the drain. In mid-2023, Australia introduced a direct streamline pathway to citizenship for New Zealanders. So that's kind of like the US being like, oh, Canadian citizens up there, I see you're having a hard time with your cost of living. We'll streamline you to US citizens. You just have to follow this process. And you get streamlined in. I mean, in my opinion, that would supercharge a brain drain. And that's exactly what Australia did to New Zealand. Oh, okay. Okay, so New Zealanders who have lived there for 4 years. So you got to live there for 4 years, and then you basically get citizen. This instantly wiped away decades of bureaucratic hurdles, giving Kiwis immediate access to Australians' social security, student loans, and voting rights. Post-COVID OE backlog, public sector trim. Okay, let's continue. Proportionality versus stability. New Zealand's mixed member proportional system produces parliaments that closely mirror voters' preferences, but coalitions haggling can lead to instability. Really? Coalitions haggling can lead to instability. The US two-party first-past-the-post system produces stable governments, but often leaves large blocks of voters feeling unrepresented. 2. Speed versus safeguards. New Zealand's unicameral parliament can pass laws quickly, sometimes too quickly, with critics arguing there are insufficient checks. The US bicameral system with separation of powers is deliberately slow, designed to present hasty or overreaching legislation. This also produces chronic gridlock. I would rather a system that's too fast than a system. Because in a democracy, changing a gridlock is almost impossible. Like, gridlock is structural. The problem that we see in the US, and honestly, I don't know if they're flexibility versus rigidity. New Zealand's uncodified constitution is highly flexible. Parliament can adapt it relatively easily. The US Constitution is intentionally hard to amend. We're seeing this with where is it? Birthright citizenship. Right now, we see this with birthright citizenship, and it's intentionally hard to amend, providing stability and protection for rights, but also making it difficult to modernize. It's difficult to bring into modern pressures, react to modern pressures. Consensus versus adversarial politics. Coalition governments in New Zealand push parties towards compromise and negotiation. The US two-party system tends towards an adversarial zero-sum style of politics where winning matters more than consensus. Centralized versus decentralized. New Zealand is small, unitary state. National government sets the rules for the whole country. The US federal system distributes enormous power to states, creating 50 different policy environments that can be innovative but also deeply unequal depending on where you that's the problem, right? Like, even though I'm looking at New Zealand versus the US, the scales are so different. Like, you're almost better off looking at New Zealand versus a state government, but it's its own country. Maybe I should try comparing them to similar like-minded sized powers rather than one of the big systems I understand. Both systems reflect genuine democratic values, but have made different trade-offs between representation, efficiency, stability, and protection of rights. Neither is objectively superior. Each suits the history, size, and culture of its. Well, I mean, like, you're looking at objective superiority. There is an index for how representative your government is. New Zealand is definitely better. I mean, the United States is good. Don't get me wrong. It is still blue. Ain't that good. Anyway, so we got to the end of this. I quite like the mixed member proportional. It tries to bridge the first past the post with proportional representation, and it tries to pair the two concepts together. And in my opinion, it does a pretty good job at that. I mean, it shows in their index, right? Second highest. The downsides are it is more complicated. It is also set up to kind of. Let me add another question. How many parties are there in New Zealand? Let's just see. I should be like how and what percentage of vote they get, but it'll probably give us the answer. I think we did enough that I'm not gonna watch the video. That is 12 minutes that I could be talking. Okay. Parties in Parliament and parties that are registered but don't hold seats. Okay. Government coalition. So their current coalition is made up of 3 different parties. New Zealand National Party, ACT New Zealand. So they're center-right, right/libertarian, populist/national. New Zealand First. Oh. Opposition. New Zealand Labour Party, Green Party, no. Maori Party. Registered party without parliament seats. So it looks like they have a 6-party system, which is better. They've got 5 parties that are registered that don't hold seat. Why so many parties exist? I mean, like, more parties, the more better, in my opinion. Ooh, November 7th, 2026, which determined the composition of the 55th Parliament. Given current polling and coalition dynamics, it is likely the sixth party landscape will continue, though the balance of power between them may shift significantly. Interesting. They got an election coming up. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to move on. Have stuck on the topic far. Okay. Now, what did I want to cover next? Let's have a look. What stands out? We talked about the fertility rate, but that was one of those things. That was a topic that was actually quite popular. I don't know if I can go into that in 2 tabs. Gerrymander. No, that was the whole issue going on in the U.S. Government. I don't know. Ooh, I wanted to check that. Okay, let's have a look. I want to know what derivative mark. Because this is something that's come up multiple times. Like it's one of those complex financial assets. Is how they describe. You can't use that. Can you explain to me what derivative markets are? I've heard that they caused the 2008 financial crisis. Can you explain that to me? Okay. All right, I'll be back in a minute. I'll let that go. The mic. Okay. So we gotta update the stream or talk about what is why do I write it? I know I can use it. What's going on? What is a derivative? It's so much easier. Now we gotta update this a bit. Okay. Cube. This entertainment? I mean, Asian. I don't know. One of them I should probably. Okay. So we're gonna look at what derivative markets are, and I heard that they were involved in the 2008 financial crisis. So we're gonna see. Let's have a look. Oh. We're good. A derivative is a financial contract whose value is derived from an underlying asset. Okay. Like a stock, bond, commodity, currency, or interest rate. You're not buying the asset itself. You're buying a contract that bets on what the asset will do. So rather than getting a stock, rather than taking like a position on a stock, you're taking a position that the stock is going to go up. So it's a derivative of the stock. Think of it like a side bet. Two people watch a horse race and bet between themselves on the outcome. No horse changes hands, just money based on what happens. But then you're like the person who's taking a bet on who of those two people is going to win. Is that the derivative? Common types of derivative. Futures, a contract to buy, sell something at a set price on a future date. So this is the common one that I've heard about. Farmers locking in wheat prices. So when a farmer decides to grow a crop, he will try to set up a futures contract, which is okay. It's going to cost me X to produce Y. Therefore, I'm going to create a futures contract that I will sell for more than X. And that way, no matter what happens in the wheat market, the farmer makes his profit because he's set the contract already. Now, if wheat prices are higher than the set amount, then the person offering the contract made a profit. And usually, for the security of knowing you'll have a specific price come harvest time, that price is lower, from my understanding, like just a little lower than what the actual expected market price is. But it gives the farmer insurance against a price of wheat shock, because wheat is a global commodity It goes up and down based off of global supply and demand. Kind of like oil. And so I can see how that could be both beneficial to the farmer and beneficial to the person providing the future. Right? Options. The right to buy or sell at a set price, but not obligation. So you don't have to sell, but it's the right to buy and sell. So this is similar to the farmer example. But whereas a farmer is doing something specific for wheat, this is just any other commodity or any other, like any other commodity, right? They'd have the right to buy or sell at a fixed rate at a certain time. The right to buy or sell at a set price. And so you don't have the obligation to sell. So then if you have an option to sell at a specific price, so if you have an option to sell at a specific price and the actual price is lower, gosh, I'm getting this all confused in my head already. So there's two types of options. There's a buy and there's a sell option. So sell confuses me, so let's try buy. You have an option to buy something at a specific price. If the real price at that time is lower, then you would buy at the lower price and you would not use the option. But if the price to buy that item or that commodity is higher, then you are making money by using the option. So that option makes you the difference depending on how much you sell. I assume that there's a limit on like how much you can buy or sell at the option price. But then I just figure there has to be a limit. Swaps. Two parties exchange cash flow. Cash flows, like trading a fixed interest rate for a variable one. Two parties exchange cash flow. Trading a fixed interest rate for a variable. Okay, like that. And the example is the only thing I can think of for this situation, so depending on, you could set like if someone thinks there's going to be a fixed interest rate, someone wants a fixed interest rate, and someone wants to trade a variable interest rate. Oh my goodness, that is so complicated. Why would you do that? I mean, I guess that these are like things that financial institutions, right? They have all day to sit there and think of swaps that might benefit them. Okay, credit default swaps, essentially insurance against a borrower defaulting on a loan. Okay, derivatives serve legitimate purposes. Airlines use them to hedge against fuel price swings. Farmers use them to guarantee crop prices. Banks use them to manage risk. The problem is they can also be used for pure speculation with enormous leverage. How they contributed to the 2008 crisis. The 2008 crisis was a perfect storm, and derivatives were the accelerant. Here's how it unfolded. The housing bubble. US banks started issuing subprime mortgages, loans to borrowers with poor credit. I mean, that's just not a thing to do. That is a bad thing. Often with little or no down payment. The assumption was that housing prices would always rise. We know that not to be true. Mortgage-backed securities. Banks bundled thousands of these mortgages together and sold them as bonds called mortgage-backed securities. Investors worldwide bought them, hungry for yield. Oh, because they're selling, they're doing more loans to borrowers with poor credit that will have a higher interest rate. So when you see a higher interest rate, the gains look better. And so when you bundle them all together into a mortgage-backed security, it's a mortgage-backed security that has a higher interest rate payout. So it looks better than a normal mortgage-backed security. And so investors worldwide bought them because they look better, hungry for the yield. Yeah, okay. This gave banks cash to issue even more mortgage. Oh my God, they just created a cycle. So the investors don't really understand the risk here, right? So you take, from my understanding of it, you take a house, you bundle it with a bunch of other houses, and you essentially create a mortgage-backed security. Because this is all made by subprime or loans to borrowers with poor credit, there's a higher interest rate. So you're bringing in more cash flow. The yield is better. And so investors who look at that yield will pump money into it because the yield looks like it's performing and bringing back more money than their competitors, than loans to not people with poor credit. So this gave banks cash to issue more mortgages so that they could lower their standards and loan to borrowers with even poorer credit. Okay, CDOs. Complexity piled on complexity. Banks then took slices of the mortgage-backed securities and repackaged them into collateralized debt obligations. This is the problem, right? Like, a couple big words get thrown out like this, and they're just like, oh, why? Why do I have to understand this? I don't want to. And that's how they get you. These were so complex that almost nobody fully understood what was inside them, including the credit rating agency that stamped them AAA, the safest possible rating. So they've somehow gave loans to borrowers with poor credit. This created mortgage-backed securities with high yields, and they have packaged it in such a complex way that credit rating agencies were giving them the safest possible rating, despite the fact they were loans to borrowers with poor credit. So the worst people to loan to were getting the highest possible rating. This is not going to end badly. There's no way. There's no way, right? Credit default swaps, the lit fuse. Here's where derivatives turned a bubble into a catastrophe. Companies like AIG sold massive amounts of credit default swaps, essentially promising to pay out if those CODs, so the complexity pile and complexity stuff, defaulted. They collected premiums and thought the risk was minimal. Well, they're looking at the safest possible rating. I mean, doesn't that mean the risk is minimal right there? AAA? That means risk is minimal, huh? So there were companies that sold credit default swaps, promising to pay out if those collateralized debt obligations defaulted. They collected premiums and thought the risk was minimal. So they collected premiums as their cash flow. They thought they were safe because they got the safest possible rating. But the whole thing was built on loans to borrowers with poor credit. So this is where everything went wrong. Okay. But because CDS, oh gosh, so many credit default swaps were largely unregulated, AIG and others sold far more insurance than they could ever pay out. Oh. So they're selling insurance essentially. So this is like an insurance company giving out insurance that they far larger than they could ever actually pay out. There was no requirement to hold reserves. Well, problem. That right there is a problem. Because credit default swap is a good deal if you know you're holding loans to borrowers with poor credit. Like, you're going to take the credit default swap, the AIG, even if it costs you a premium, because you're offloading all of the risk, right? And you know, like, if you understand the risk, you're absolutely going to take it. So this would be okay. They collected premiums and thought the risk was minimal because the credit default swaps were largely unregulated. AIG and others sold far more insurance than they could ever pay. There was no requirement to hold reserves. It was like an insurance company selling millions of fire policies with no money in the vault. Collapse. When housing prices fell and subprime borrowers began defaulting en masse, MBS lost their value. MBS. Let's make sure we know what they're talking about. Mortgage-backed securities. So the ones built on loans to borrowers with poor credit. Mortgage-backed securities lost their values. The collateralized debt obligations collapsed. Credit default swaps contracts were triggered, but the sellers, like AIG, couldn't pay because they're unregulated and they got no money. We're just collecting premiums. Isn't this like right there? That's the level where it's like in my opinion, fraud, right? You're saying, okay, massive, you're making a credit default swap, you're taking on the risk, but you've got no money to handle the risk. Like, fundamentally, this looks like fraud. But, like, unregulated. That's where they get you. That's where they get you. The collapse. Okay. So, the credit default swaps were triggered, but the sellers, like AIG, couldn't pay. Banks that held these assets suddenly had massive holes in their balance sheet. banks that held these assets, so the credit default swaps, had holes in their balance sheet. Because the same securities were held globally, the damage spread worldwide. Instant. How were the banks involved? Okay, before we move on, I wanna understand. Oh. I always do that. Windows 8. If okay, how do I word this? So if sellers like if the CDS contracts were triggers and the sellers like AGI couldn't pay, how did this involve the banks? Wouldn't this just cause the sellers like AIG to collapse? Like you think this would cause the sellers, the credit default swaps like AIG to collapse, and then this would collapse the debt, the collaborative debt obligations. And then this would collapse the mortgage-backed securities, and in the end, the loans to borrowers with poor credit is the thing that would collapse, right? Because in the end, loans to borrowers with poor credit essentially owed money to these companies like AIG, but like, okay, I that is, they have made this so complex. They have intentionally piled complexity on complexity in order to get a good rating, to fuel the system, and it collapsed. Okay. Let's see. This is exactly the part that confuses most people. The answer is that the banks were on both sides of the equation. Let me break it down. Banks were the ones holding the ticking time bombs. I mean, in the end, it's the loans, people with poor credit, which are the bomb. And it is the banks which are giving out these loans. Yeah, remember, banks had loaded up their balance sheet with CODs and MBS. So like these are the mortgage-backed security, CODs, collaborative debt obligations, which are fundamentally built up of loans to borrowers with poor credit. The very securities that were now worthless, they had bought protection on those securities through contracts. The banks got played? Is that what I'm seeing here? Like, AIG is offering you protection on your securities, but they have no money. They'll offer you protection in case something goes wrong. Just no monetary protection. No, like, you know. Like, the banks not look at these companies and be like, how are they offering us protection when they have no money? That doesn't make sense. But I guess pretending that they had money kept the gravy train going, right? And that's what it comes down to a lot of the time. Just keep the gravy train going. They're making money. And the taxpayers are the ones that'll have to pay in the end. So they bought protection on those securities, which they know are bad, through the default swap contracts with AGI and others, thinking they were hedged and safe. No. Like these are banks. They know they're not hedged and safe. They just want the gravy train to keep going because they're making a lot of money. And in the end, if they make something big enough, they know they'll be bailed out by the taxpayer. So it's not their problem if everything goes to shit. So when AIG couldn't pay out on the fact credit default swap, security. So when AIG couldn't pay out on the credit default swap contracts, the bank's insurance turned out to be worthless, meaning the losses on their CODs and MODs, so basically all their securities, were now fully exposed with nothing to offset them. Think of it this way. Imagine you bought a house and took out a separate insurance policy on it. Your balance sheet looks fine because if the house burns down, you're covered. Now imagine your insurance company goes bankrupt. Suddenly your balance sheet has a massive uninsured loss on it. That's what happened to the bank. Ooh. I mean, like, banks are not stupid. They put themselves in this position. Oh, it gets worse. Oh my goodness. The banks were exposed in multiple ways. It wasn't just the credit default swap problem. The banks were caught in several traps at once. They held the mortgage-backed securities directly on their own books, which were now worth far less than stated. This is because housing prices are going down, right? So their mortgage-backed securities, which are made up of houses from subprime mortgages, they're just worth less. Their insurance via the credit default swaps evaporated when sellers like AIG couldn't pay. They had lent money to other banks and institutions that were also collapsing, meaning these loans weren't coming back either. They had lent money to other banks and institutions that were also collapsing. So basically, the banks found a money glitch and then realized it wasn't a money glitch and that the money was coming from somewhere, and they had built it on a very, very sand-like foundation because they were not. Because in the end, this is all built off of loans to borrowers with poor credit. Like, you build a monetary system off this, you will have problems. Like, you're gonna have problems. But they were making so much money, they didn't care, right? And they had lent to other banks and institutions, which were also doing the same thing. They had off-balance sheet vehicles stuffed with these semi-toxic assets, which they were now legally on the hook for. Oh, okay. The intrabank trust collapse, the real killer. Here's what actually froze the global economy. Banks make short-term loans to each other constantly, every single day, just to manage their daily cash flow. This is called the intrabank lending market. They're always lending and borrowing money from each other. I mean, why? I thought the whole point of a bank is you take money that people give you to hold, you lend that money out to what you believe will be a sound investment. And if that money, and because you know what a sound investment looks like, that makes you more money, and then you still hold that person's money and you can give them a little bit of interest, because you're making money, and the difference is the cut you get. Isn't this the foundation of banking? Why does this require me to buy and sell to other banks? I assume they're just like trying to like level off cash flows. Okay. It exists. The interbank lending market. I don't have to understand why it exists. When the crisis hit, no bank knew how much toxic garbage was sitting on any other bank's balance sheet. Probably a lot. Because everything had been so opaque and complex. Yeah, the complexity on complexity level, right? So they simply stopped lending to each other entirely. Ooh. So there was an interbank lending system that the whole market had kind of become dependent on. But then all of a sudden, nobody knew how many toxic loans this institution was holding because of the complexity. It could have just shut down the lending system entirely. It's like if you had a friend group where everyone regularly lent each other small amounts of money, and then one day a rumor spread that one of your friends were secretly broke, but you didn't know which one. You stopped lending to all of them. That's, if I'm lending them small amounts of money, I don't care about. Okay, but I get it. We're gonna stick with the example. You stop lending to all of them. That's what banks did globally almost overnight. I mean, this is what happens when they just started stacking complexity on top of each other, right? This caused a liquidity crisis. Even banks that weren't insolvent suddenly couldn't access the short-term cash they needed to operate day to day. Ooh. I mean, it sounds to me like you're overstretching. So to directly answer your question, yes, AIG's collapse would have been devastating on its own, but the reason governments had to step in and save the entire system was the banks weren't innocent bystanders. They were holding the worthless assets that triggered the CD, the controlled default swaps. The default swaps contracts in the first place. The banks had used those same toxic assets as collateral for other borrowing. Oh. So they'd used the same toxic assets as collateral for other borrowing. So the write-downs cascaded. The mutual distrust between banks froze credit markets globally, threatening businesses and individuals who had nothing to do with any of it. The scary phase at the time was too big to fail. These institutions were so deeply woven into the global financial system that letting them collapse would have caused a depression potentially worse than the 1930s. That's why governments around the world felt they had no choice but to bail them out. So they built an entire tower on subprime mortgage, loans to borrowers with poor credit. They built an entire financial structure on top of it. That structure was shown to have been built on sand, and started to collapse, but governments couldn't let it collapse because it would have taken out banks, a large financial, and that could have caused a depression, and so they bailed them out. That is insane. Like, how many people went to prison for this? Because there's a couple steps here. This one, offering insurance when you don't have money to pay out. Isn't that fraud? The whole piling complexity onto complexity in order to get your safe rating. Like, let me see. This sounds a lot like a scam to me. I need my headphones on. I need to hear the sound. This sounds a lot like a scam. How many people went to prison for this? Okay, I haven't finished the core problem. Let's finish this and then we'll go read the how many people have gone to prison. The core problem. Derivatives themselves aren't evil, they're tools. Yeah. Like we've seen multiple times where this can be used to benefit people. A farmer can make yearly plans because he can take a price swap or whatever it's called, a futures contract that guarantees him a certain amount of money at the end of his year, and so he can budget out his whole year and know that this is going to be a profitable thing for him to do, and so then he can start planting and have it all planned out. Derivatives themselves aren't evil. What went wrong in 2008 was a combination of opacity, nobody knew who owed what to whom, which was largely, in my opinion, driven by the complexity on complexity step in order to get the safest possible rating. Leverage, tiny bets controlled enormous sums, lack of regulation, like just the not regulating. Companies like AIG, just not a good idea. Misaligned incentives, banker collected fees for issuing loans they'd never be responsible for. I mean, that sounds like a good idea for the bankers, right? Interconnectedness, when one domino fell, they all fell together. Crisis led to the Dodd-Frank Act 2010, which pushed many derivatives onto regulated exchanges, requiring more transparency and forcing institutions to hold more capital as a buffer. Both good things, assuming they don't make companies to get around that. Let's see, how many people went to jail? Your instinct is understandable, and you're not alone in feeling that way. The short answer is remarkably few people, especially at the top. The numbers, about 402 individuals face criminal charges, including 97 bankers charged with fraud. Of those, 324 were convicted and 222 were sentenced to prison. I mean, that's actually more. That sounds like a lot. Read the next sentence. It sounds like a lot until you realize almost none of them were senior Wall Street executives. They were mostly small players, mortgage brokers, loan officers, mid-level fraudsters. The more telling numbers for many critics is 0, the number of Wall Street executives prosecuted for fraud directly related to the financial meltdown that left 8.8 million Americans jobless and triggered a $700 billion government bailout. So, no one responsible for this faced accountability. And you think you're going to stop it. You think you're going to stop the next one when the last one has 0 accountability. This is what makes it particularly striking. When Enron collapsed, top executives faced criminal prosecution and served lengthy prison terms. In the saving and loan scandals of the 1980s, hundreds of bankers went to jail. Among those jailed in the S&L crisis were Charles Keating Jr., whose Lincoln Savings and Loan cost taxpayers $3.4 billion, and David Paul, who was sentenced to 11 years in prison for his role in the 1.7 billion collapse of Central Trust Bank. 2008 was far larger and more damaging, yet far fewer people faced consequence. So, what have we learned? It is apparently a good time for financial fraud in the US right now. If you can get high enough, there is apparently no consequences for financial fraud in the US. That is going to create a lot more financial fraud. Why didn't more people go to prison? Several reasons were given at the time. The Holder memo problem. In 1990, the deputy attorney wrote a memo stating that prosecutors should take collateral consequences into account when deciding whether to bring charges against corporations. Oh, yeah. I remember hearing about this. There was like one specific case in the US where they prosecuted a large corporation for doing wrongdoing, and it led to a bunch of people becoming unemployed. And then from that point on, like, the government in the US just didn't have any balls anymore. Like, they weren't gonna put people out of work because it looks bad, which means you can't prosecute you can't prosecute a corporation, because what if they fire people? Then that looks bad on you. And so the government lost their balls into account when deciding whether to bring charges against corporations. After 2008, this memo drew attention when it became clear big bank executives would not face criminal prosecution. Fear was that prosecuting a bank could destabilize the entire financial system. Prosecutors claimed they lacked evidence. Holder late told CNN, "We simply didn't have the proof. If we could have made those cases, we certainly would have brought them." Complexity was used as a shield. The financial products were so convoluted that proving criminal intent versus reckless stupidity was extremely difficult. Oh. So if you can create enough complexity, the law literally can't hold you to account. That's crazy. Prosecutors needed to prove someone knowingly committed fraud, not just made catastrophic bad decisions. I mean, at some point, catastrophic bad decisions are worth prosecuting. When it costs the taxpayer $700 billion, maybe you should punish catastrophic bad decisions. Regulatory referrals were missing. One key tool used during the S&L crisis, criminal referrals from regulators to prosecutors. Former government official noted these referrals are absolutely essential because they provide a roadmap for prosecutors and argue they were largely absent in the response to 2008. What did happen instead? Banks paid enormous fines, billions of dollars in settlements, but crucially those fines were paid by the banks themselves, i.e. their shareholders, not by the individual executives who made the decisions. Many of those executives kept their bonuses and walked away well. Other countries did better. Ireland, for example, jailed 3 senior bankers for up to 3.5 years for conspiring to defraud investors. Most prominent prosecution arose from the 2008 crisis there. So yes, many people share your view that the accountability was grossly inadequate. The crisis collectively destroyed over 30 trillion of the world's wealth. Millions lost their homes and jobs, and the architecture of it largely faced no personal criminal consequence. It remains one of the most controversial episodes in modern legal and financial history. Oh, what? 30 trillion of the world's wealth. Because they decided to build a freaking tower off people, off loans to borrowers with poor credit. And they integrated it through mortgage-backed securities and complexity deep into the financial system. And when house prices finally turned, and the loans to borrowers with poor credit clearly became a foundation that was built on sand, the whole system almost collapsed, and and countries had to step in, bail it out, and no one high up faced consequence at all. Zero. The number of Wall Street executives prosecuted for fraud directly related to the financial meltdown that left 8.8 million Americans jobless and triggered a 700 billion government bailout. No accountability. Destroyed over 30 trillion of the world's wealth. How did this affect Canada? Was there anyone prosecuted in Canada for collaborating with this? Like, this is wild. But like, this makes me terrified of private equity. Because so much of this stemmed from the complexity step, where they got the safest possible rating because they just used complexity that no one could understand. But in private equity, it's all private. You can't see any of the finance. And some of the things I hear, like they do in private equity, is just terrifying. It is like a much smaller part of the economy than the subprime mortgages were. Obviously, this was a far bigger block in the foundation. Private equity could cause some problems if it's half as full of fraud as I think it is. Okay, this is really interesting part of the story because Canada's experience was quite different from the US in both how it affected and in the limited accountability that followed. Canada was hit, but not as hard. When European and North American banks teetered on the brink of a meltdown in 2008, Canadian banks escaped relatively unscathed. Canada had built a system of large, diversified financial institutions under the watchful eye of a single, strong regulator, a very different path from the fragmented, loosely regulated US system. While the US experienced bank failures, bailouts, and the worst recession since the 1930s, Canada had no bank failures, no bailouts, and its recession was less severe. However, Canada wasn't untouched. Collapse of oil and other Canadian commodity export prices compounded the effects of the financial crisis, and the Canadian economy fell into a recession in October 2008. Job losses hit manufacturing, construction, and export-oriented industries particularly hard, and unemployment rose during this period. Canada's own mini-crisis, the ABCP scandal. Canada had its own derivative adjacent scandal called asset-backed commercial paper. In the year leading up to 2007, investors had piled into asset-backed commercial paper, 30-day and 60-day notes that paid interest earned from bundling assets like mortgages and auto loans together. As fear spread that U.S. subprime mortgages would result in massive defaults, new buyers of ABCP disappeared, leaving $33 billion of securities in limbo. The institution most affected included National Bank of Canada. So we had a mini scandal right before the collapse. Regular Canadians, including retirees and small businesses, had unknowingly been sold these complex instruments as if they were safe, simple short-term investment. No criminal prospect, like we didn't really have it. The bailout, there's one more detail that surprised many Canadians. A 2012 report from the Canadian Center of Policy Alternatives revealed that Canada banks actually received about $114 billion in government support during the recession, a fact that was largely unreported at the contradicted the popular narrative that Canada banks sailed through the crisis entirely on their own strength. So we also paid quite a bit to banks during this period. Like, it's not that they weren't leveraged in this. The bottom line for Canada fared better than most countries because of stricter banking regulations and a more conservative lending culture. Canadian banks never dove as deep into subprime mortgages swaps as US banks did, but they weren't entirely clean either. They did receive significant government support, and as with the US, no individual was ever held criminally accountable. The pattern of fines without prosecutions was very much the same on both sides. Can this happen again, or have they figured this out yet? I do not want another 2008 financial crisis. The honest answer is, okay, I'll say that forever. The honest answer is they've made it harder to have the exact same crisis, but new risks have emerged, and some of the old safeguards are actively being dismantled right now. I mean, they prevent you from stealing money in one way. You just steal money in a different way. It's beautiful. There's always new ways to steal money. There's always new ways to defraud the government. And if you get big enough, you get to defraud the taxpayer. Because the government will bail you out. What they actually fixed. After 2008, the US passed the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010. It was the most significant set of new rules for finances since the Great Depression. From my understanding, they just pass the risk off to other institutions. Like they set rules for specific, like banks or something, and the banks just pass it off to other corporations. I don't know. Here we go. Stopping a decade-long role of deregulation and setting critical, important new standards. Key changes include stress tests, living wills, derivatives moved to exchanges. This is it. Derivatives were moved to exchanges, but exchanges then do derivatives, like move risky derivatives elsewhere or something. I don't know. Okay, let's see if they cover it. So they could be tracked and regulated, not traded in the shadows. So that's important. When stuff happens with no oversight, private equity, this is where issues go up. The Volcker rule restricts banks from making purely speculative bets with depositors' money. More capital requirements. If something does fail today, we now have a process to follow. Regulators have the legal ability to go in, shut a firm down, and reopen it for orderly liquidation. In 2008, regulators had to make things up on the fly. Okay. But here's the problem, the guardrails are being weakened. This is where it gets concerning. The regulation put in place after 2008 have been under sustained attack by the banking industry ever since, and are being rolled back right now. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank in 2023 was a direct result of the 2018 deregulation that lifted the 50 billion threshold, allowing banks to expand without being subject to the Federal Reserve stress test and other requirements designed to curb aggressive risk-taking. That was a preview of what looser rules can do. As recently as July 2025, House Republicans have begun attempting to roll back significant parts of the Dodd-Frank Act, targeting not just the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, but the laundry list of banks regulation complaints. Critics of this approach argue it's like saying a single brick can be taken away from a wall and the wall will still stand. But if you lose enough bricks, there goes the wall. New risks that didn't exist in 2008. Even if the old vulnerabilities were still addressed, entirely new ones have appeared. Cryptocurrencies in 2024, meme coins, digital currencies with no intrinsic value, surged from 20 billion to 120 billion in value. This kind of speculative frenzy echoes the pre-2008 environment, just in a new form, and crypto remains largely unregulated. I mean, if you're putting your money in crypto, just understand that there is no intrinsic value. It could all just go to zero tomorrow, and that's that. Like, that could happen. You don't put money into crypto if you need the money. Like, crypto, in my opinion, is gambling for rich people. Buy now, pay later debt. Oh, gosh, we haven't even gotten into that. Companies like Klarna are now bundling consumer debt, including fast food purchases, selling it to hedge funds, arguing the bundle of mortgages in the pre-2008 era. Why? Why are you letting them do this? They're using the same playbook. They just need the complexity now. Okay, who's going to offer the complexity? We need to make this complex enough that we get a AAA rating. That's the next step. Non-bank financial institutions. This, because the non-bank means that they're not under the same regulations. They function like a bank, but they call themselves a non-bank. A huge amount of lending and financial activity has shifted to hedge funds, private equity, and other firms that operate outside the banking regulations put in place after 2000. Commercial real estate. There's a growing debt crisis developing in banking systems worldwide, with vast quantities of bank lending secured on commercial and domestic properties that are increasingly overvalued or at risk of becoming uninsurable due to climate change. I feel like I could do a whole video on each of these. This is woefully short descriptions. The uncomfortable bottom line. You rarely get hit by the bus you're watching for. That's the most important insight. The next crisis probably won't look like 2000. It'll come from a direction we're not fully watching. What does tend to repeat is the underlying pattern. Financial innovation outpaces regulation. Too much debt gets hidden in complex products. The people taking the risks know that if things go wrong, the public will ultimately foot the bill. As long as this dynamic, privatizing profits while socializing losses, remains in place, The conditions for another crisis will always exist. It's just a question of what triggers it next time. That's the uncomfortable bottom line, huh? I mean, maybe it would help if you held the people from the last financial crisis accountable for their actions. Just saying, like, to me, complexity doesn't mean you get to just face no repercussions. But this is the pattern. Financial innovation outpaces regulation. Too much debt gets hidden in complex products, and the people taking the risks know that if things go wrong, the public will ultimately foot the bill. I think this is exactly what's happening in private equity right now. As long as the dynamic, privatizing profits while socializing losses, remains in place, the condition for another crisis will always exist. It's just a question of what triggers it next time. Well, I think I'm going to end it there. This sucks. Not as complicated as I thought it was. Like, I mean, obviously, I have no idea what they do with the complexity piled on complexity crap. It clearly tricked rating agencies. But if a product is too complex for you to understand, you shouldn't be giving a rating, in my opinion. And this is like one of the, obviously stuff went wrong in each of the steps, but this is the big one to me. And from my understanding, like, banks incentivize rating agencies to give it a high rate. Like, I don't know what they did, but there was an incentive structure there. So I remember hearing about that the big rating agencies were highly incentivized to provide these not safe assets with a safe rating. And that is what triggered this, which is what caused the whole, well, housing prices going down is what caused it to collapse. But this is what happened. This is the first fault. They gave out insurance, but they had no money in the vault. And so then when housing prices collapse, all of a sudden, oh, you have to pay your insurance now. And they didn't have the money. And then all of a sudden, all the insured assets that are depreciating don't have insurance. Because the companies you've insured them through were just fraud, essentially. Okay, well, I think I'm going to be getting off. Great, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. I will be back Thursday at 6. Peace.